Alright, y'all. I've been promising it forever, and today is the day. I'm recording it now. So, limb-girdle muscular dystrophy kind of sounds like maybe you've got a heavy branch that needs some extra support on your tree, and I'd tell you to go to a horticulturist, but that was before I learned how serious this condition actually is. Let's go in the house so you can hear me really well. I'll throw some graphics up to explain this condition to you. Today is the day for the video, the power of limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. Limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, not a horticulture tool for supporting heavy branches on trees. So what is it? It's kind of a long story. It's got a lot of technical stuff to it, so hope you'll be patient. I got my trusty notes here to help us out. So, LGMD type 2J, also known as tendinopathy, or if you go by the new rating, Limb-Girdle Muscular Dystrophy -R10. So, first off, before we get started, guys, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a genetic specialist. I'm going to do my best to break this down as I have learned it over the last 5 years so you can understand it at least as well as I do. Now, some of y'all, I believe, might be more expert at this than me. Please speak up, go down to the comment section, correct me if I need to be corrected. I want everybody to have the right information for this. So, here we go. First off, there are 3 main reasons that I really want to talk about limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. The first one is to help all of y'all, whether you're here to see about chickens, gardening, learn about cooking, just find an activity you can still do in life so that you can contribute to your family, which is the purpose of this whole website. That is the main reason. I want you to understand, why do we choose certain methods? Why do we choose certain setups? Why do we choose certain time scales? Why does it take us so long to get some stuff done? You may need to compare because you have a similar disorder or know somebody with a similar disorder that has an interest in these areas that would like to get back into some way of participating in them. You can compare some of our methods through this video, but you need to understand first why, how it affects the person, how it's affecting you, and what you can expect in the future. Secondly, I want to give an account of how I've experienced it for other people that have loved ones or themselves are going through this condition and don't understand what is happening, what can I expect, why is this happening, what went wrong. Somewhere along the way it feels like something went wrong, so we're going to talk about that too. And finally, I want to give some understanding and awareness of this condition to people that don't know much about it or who possibly have never even heard it. So, long stack, but we're going to get it through it fast. So, you need to understand what genes are and how they affect the body. So, first off, traditionally, muscular dystrophy has always been categorized by which gene protein is affected, and it's broken into subtypes, and each subtype is known to affect specific muscles within the limb girdle at different rates. So you need to know what a limb girdle is. Not a tree branch, attached point, but similar. So this is the human body. Okay, limbs, your arms, and your legs are your limbs, where they connect. Your hips right across here, and your shoulders. Good EDS thing. Shoulders. That is considered the girdle, okay? So the girdle, limb girdle, where the limbs attach to the body, is the limb girdle. Now, limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, as the name implies, affects the muscles in those specific regions. by the proteins anyway. They do affect others, but it's a progressive thing and it's not directly. So there are two different main groups, okay, and those two groups are T1 and T2. But broken down, if you know anything about genes, T1 is dominant, T2 is recessive. So anything with a T1 means that you only need one copy of that gene to be T1, active limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, T1 type, okay? And then T2, you'd have to have both copies. So you got a copy from your mom, you got a copy from your dad. This doesn't mean they have limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. They can only have one copy that's normal and one copy that's limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, and you got the limb-girdle muscular dystrophy copy from one, and you got the limb-girdle muscular dystrophy copy from the other. It wouldn't be active in them because they're only a carrier, but because you got two copies, it's active in you. So that is the type 2 categorization. I'm hoping these graphics are working for y'all. And that's the dominant versus recessive. Now, with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, it's really rare. Across the United States, it ranges from 1 in 14,500 all the way up to 1 in 123,000. Now, obviously, some subtypes are more rare than others. The T1s are actually considered pretty common, type 1s. And there's 8 different ones of those. There are 17 type 2s, and 3 of them are considered extremely rare. Those would be closer to that 1 in 123,000. Now, lucky me, I happen to have one of them, but that does put me in a position to help you explain something that's pretty rare and you may not be able to find information on otherwise. So those are the 3 are type 2G, 2H, and 2J. 2J is the one I have. So let's look at just the type 2. As I mentioned, there are 17. Let's see if I can get this right. I'm going to put this list up, and if I butcher the pronunciation, put it in the comments. Let me know. Okay, so type 2A, caplinopathy. Type 2B, dysferlinopathy. Type 2C through F are all known as sarcoglycanopathy. Sarcoglycanopathy. Yeah. Type 2G, this is one of the rare ones, telethonopathy. Telethonopathy. So like a telethon on TV, telethonopathy. I like this one, 2H. It's a rare one, but it's easy to read. TRIM32 mutations. Type 2I is a Fukuted-related proteinopathies. The one I have, type 2J, is titinopathy. It's known for being in the Finnish population, so it's also known as Finnish limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. So I don't know if I'm Finnish or not. I guess somewhere along the way I must have some Finnish ancestry, probably from both sides of my family. We're a little mixed up. So finally, the last ones are type 2K through Q, and with primary A dystroglycan defect. So this list comes from nord@rarediseases.org. Please feel free to visit there. They're a great source of information. I'm going to put the link in the descriptions again so that y'all can get through another page. Okay. Now, what does all that mean? All that means is that each of those affects a different gene. So there's a gene for titin, a gene for sarcoglycan, a gene for dysferlin, a gene for Kaplan. See the Kaplanopathy, titinopathy. So it kind of, scientists are just that creative. All right, Carl's about to walk in. Don't be afraid. It's okay. It's all good. All right, so in order to understand how this is working, you have to understand what a protein is. So protein sounds simple enough. I'll drink a protein shake, fix the whole problem, right? Not that easy, because the body takes proteins that we ingest, and in the digestive system, it breaks them down into amino acids. Now, you can think of amino acids as kind of like the building blocks. They're molecules that combine to form proteins and are created by the body breaking down a protein into a more manageable form, which it then reconstructs in different forms throughout the body at a cellular level. And what it reconstructs are proteins. So you take proteins, you eat the protein, it breaks it into amino acid, and it reconstructs it as all different types of proteins throughout the body. And it's funny because, I mean, there are so many different types of proteins. Every one of these on this list is considered a type of protein. Some of these proteins connect the cells together. Some of them provide strength. Some of them provide strength to just the cell membrane. Some of them are proteins that provide strength to the nuclei of the cell. Some of them provide flexibility as well as strength where the cells connected. In fact, in limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, the genes tell the body how to shape these proteins in the cells and ultimately the muscles. And the cells that are affected in limb-girdle muscular dystrophy type 2J is the TTN gene. This is the biggest gene that we know. It's got the longest sequence. It's enormous. That's why it's called the Titan gene, because it's just that big. And it actually controls the proteins in the region of the body known as the sarcomeric region, which ironically enough was somebody with a connective tissue disorder known as EDS. This is another connective tissue. It's the protein that kind of binds these cells in the muscles to each other to create the network of muscles. And with tendinopathy, those cells aren't structured right. They allow it to stretch too far and ultimately tear apart. So, some scientists got together and said, you know, I don't like the classic categorization of muscular dystrophy. Let's split this up a little bit differently. And instead of dividing it up by the gene that's affected, they kind of lumped some of them together into some and others into others because genes work together. You know, one gene might say, let's make this part, the sarcomeric, stronger, and another one says, well, let's make the sarcomeric more flexible, and they work together to make it both flexible and strong. So the sarcomeric, how it functions, is affected by both of those genes. Well, traditionally, it would be like, well, it's this gene over here that's messed up, and it affects the sarcomere. But because it's this gene, we're going to call it this name. But we've got this one, it affects the same thing, but it's a different gene, so we're going to call it by this name. And that's where you get that 2J, 2G, 2A, 2B, that stuff from. So, because it's identified by the gene that's affected. So the new R categorization doesn't talk about which gene is affected as much as which part or region of the cell is affected. So there's R2, there's R3 through 6, and then 9 and 12, so 12 altogether. And they're separated types by which part of the cell is affected. As I said, here's a diagram. I'm going to try to put that up. And in this system, tendinopathy is LGMD type R10 because it affects the sarcomeric, as I mentioned, the TTN gene. I got a little out of order here, which is why I'm getting to flip through these so fast. So, let's focus on 2J tendinopathies, or R10, or finished muscular dystrophy, whatever you want to call it. Again, 2, recessive. I got both copies, one from my mom, one from my dad. They were carriers. We have no family history specifically of muscular dystrophy that we are aware of. My mom was adopted, so we're not 100% sure about her family, but we have a pretty strong family history with my dad. We know that it's slow progressive. Mine actually started in my 20s. And it began building to where it became life disruptive by my mid-30s. There are some known common secondaries. It can affect the heart and the pulmonary system in general. It's known to affect the diaphragm. Swallowing and throat can be affected, as well as the stomach and just whole lower esophageal region. It starts off, as we mentioned, in the limb girdle, but it is progressive. It may start by just slightly weakening them, and then as they get weaker, they're more subject to tearing. The more damage you do to those muscles, remember, if you tear them down, you can't repair them as fast. So normally to build muscle, you actually want to create these little micro tears, and it's the progress of repairing those that strengthens those muscles and builds those muscles. But with muscular dystrophy, when you tear a muscle, it can't repair it as quickly. So you don't build muscle, you actually end up losing muscle. So it kind of, you've got to work it as much as you can without overworking it and tearing it. And basically that is to keep the blood flow going to those muscle cells so that the muscles that are there that aren't damaged are working as long as they can, as best as they can. But ultimately, with muscular dystrophy, it takes that away. And you can't rebuild those muscles. You can't grow new muscles. Muscles do age out, you know. So those muscles do eventually die off and atrophy. And you know, it's kind of like the old Bones song. Y'all remember that as kids growing up? The hand bone's connected to the wrist bone's connected to the arm bone's connected to the elbow bone. And no, I didn't do that in the right order. But you remember the song. Like, I know you remember the song. PE every day. Ugh. Okay, getting past it. But it's kind of like that, only this time instead of bones, it's muscles. So the hand muscle's connected to the arm muscle's connected to the upper arm muscle, the upper arm muscle's connected to the limb girdle. The upper arm muscle's connected to the limb girdle, but reverse that. So as the limb girdle goes out, the muscles connected to it start to weaken and go out as well. So you may not be able to stop the degeneration, the loss of muscle in the limb girdle itself. You might be able to slow it, you might be able to manage it to an extent, but you're not going to be able to stop it. Ultimately, those cells are going to die. But you can slow down and to an extent stop the progression into the lower arms. As long as you haven't got the nerve damage, then you can still work those lower muscles, okay? So one day I'm going to do an exercise video showing some basic exercises that a very smart, very adept physical therapist shared with me. But in the meantime, I encourage you, find a physical therapist, because if you don't work the muscles, the next step is that it starts to affect your bones. See, it seems kind of weird because you think muscular dystrophy affects the muscles, but the muscles are attached to the bones with these connective tissues and fibers. And as they're pulling and moving and tension is going on them, it also puts tension on those bones, which encourages them to become more dense. As you start to lose those muscles and they don't put that same tension and stress up against those bones, your bones become more porous, and this leads to osteoporosis. There's an in-between step called osteopenia, which is where I'm at. Now, eventually, it can, as that starts to progress into the pelvic and kegel region is affected, that's part of the limb girdle, that it can start to affect your bladder and your bowels as well. So some gastric aspects come into play with this as well. Now, when I was around 28 years old was when I really started to notice muscle loss. That brick wall I was talking about had been in place since about my early 20s, but that brick wall had really gotten close by the time I was 28. You have to understand, we're going to talk more in the future about how other conditions all kind of affect each other, but one of those other conditions was gastroparesis. That prevented me from taking in the nutrients and stuff that I would need in the first place, which kind of exacerbated things in my early 30s to mid 30s, and everything kind of domino affected. Not only was I losing muscle from the muscular dystrophy, and I was having a hyperflexing from the EDS, but I was also starting to lose muscle from just not enough nutrients in the first place. And with muscular dystrophy, once you lose it, it's really hard, if not impossible, to get it back. That's why it's so important. The longer you can keep it, the longer you use it, the longer you keep it, and that's very important. That's something to keep in mind. So eventually I went into osteomanipulative management. I talked about this in my Ehlers Danlos video. And in OMM, the doctor discovered the EDS. He gave me a clinical diagnosis, but he said, there's something else there. I want to look into it. I want to send you for genetic testing. So he sent me to Cook's Children's. Yes, they do see adults. They not only tested me, but they tested both of my parents as well. All three of us were tested, and they found that my parents had a copy of the gene, but not both copies, just one each. And that I had gotten the lottery ticket. I got both copies of that and a single copy of the EDS for my dad. So the testing confirming the EDS kind of helped out a lot, because it explained a lot of the inconsistencies with my experience and what I would normally expect, strictly speaking, with just EDS. So with EDS, you would expect the joint instability, hypermobility, joint pain from them shifting around all the time, but not necessarily the weakness and muscle loss that I was experiencing, despite that was unaffected by exercise and things of that nature. Guys, we're on the last page. The long run, the big picture. Limb-Girdle Muscular Dystrophy is progressive. Without targeted exercise, the progression into the proximal or outer muscles spreads faster. So you really need that exercise to slow that progression down. You can't stop it altogether, but you can buy yourself time. You need to talk to a physical therapist. You need to have a neuromuscular specialist that you're talking to. They can coordinate with a lot of different specialties. They can coordinate with a cardio doctor to check your heart function and make sure it's not affecting your cardiovascular and pulmonary. They can check your diaphragm. They can get you into a gastric specialist that can look at your colon or your stomach and make sure they're functioning right. They can get you into physical therapy. They can get you into pain management. These are all specialties that if you have limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, ultimately you're probably going to need to see. They can get you into that bone doctor so that they can test your bone density and make sure that you're not starting to develop osteopenia, especially if you found yourself spending a lot of time in a wheelchair. Use what you can. Control movements through the right kind of activity. Not only can it slow down that muscle degeneration, but it can slow down the progress into your bones. Get a good high fiber diet, something that encourages mobility. Drink plenty of fluids. Protein can't hurt. Lots of protein. Give your body as much building blocks to work with, even if it uses them wrong. There are some raw proteins. If any of you have ever tried it, the usable proteins, the proteins that are already like pre-formed, I'm very curious. I've heard some very promising things about them in research. If you've got limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, or frankly any form of muscular dystrophy, and you've tried these and they work for you, I want to know, like for sure. The inquiring minds want to know. I want to know. I am definitely an inquiring mind right now. So remember, this program is all about sharing knowledge and all of us learning together. My goodness, in all my excitement to get through all of that science, I almost forgot to give you all the testimonial that you were promised. So, okay, it would totally do you a disservice if I didn't actually tell you how I have experienced it. So I guess I got to backtrack and do the one thing I hate doing more than anything else, honestly, and that's talking about myself. So I mentioned already that my first symptoms was in 28. I kind of had that brick wall I ran up against where I couldn't get past it in muscle training. I couldn't build muscle after a certain point. It just got to that, like I said, brick wall. And no matter what I did, no matter how many hours, no matter how much weight I put on that bar, I was not able to build more muscle, and I couldn't lift more weight than that certain amount. And then by the time I was 35, that weight went from being like 120 pounds, and then it dropped and dropped and dropped until eventually I was barely able to lift a gallon of milk. So where we're at now, that's what they talk about, the progression. So where we're at now. Right now I am 43 years old, and what I have found is that I'm having to use two hands to lift things that are 10, 15 pounds. I have to use push methods and leverage to roll or move anything bigger than that. And I end up having to use a lot of wagons and carts to get even smaller items back and forth. EDS makes your joints flexible. But if you've got the muscle tone, you can still hold them in place and function pretty normal. Gastroparesis takes away and robs the body of nutrients because you can't get enough nutrients in for the body to process. I've always had a very high energy lifestyle, and as a result, I was burning through a lot of calories. And the gastroparesis kind of kicked in, and I wasn't getting the nutrients to compensate. All of that sent the muscular dystrophy into hyperdrive. And as a result, the muscles that support the joints went away. And between that and the EDS, it took away my ability to walk. Now, had it not been for the EDS, the muscular dystrophy may have taken longer to progress. If it hadn't been for the muscular dystrophy, the EDS may have never progressed to this point. So it's hard to separate the two for me. And I want to do another video, which may actually be the most important video I do. And in that video, we'll talk about how various chronic conditions like muscular dystrophy, EDS, gastroparesis, osteopenia, IBS, oh gosh, what else? POTS, regurgitating tricuspid valve, all of these things pull together and work to affect each other and how each of these develop. That's really, really hard to predict, and it really varies a lot depending on the different conditions that you have. So with me, it's hard to narrow down what is just limb-girdle muscular dystrophy type 2J. But some of the other things that the doctor has mentioned, EDS can affect the vascular system in the heart, but it doesn't generally affect the heart itself. Muscular dystrophy affects the heart itself. And some forms of muscular dystrophy do affect the heart. We're actually trying to get in to get a chest CT to check the structure of the heart. It meant I have to go through a lot of testing. It's probably one of the reasons I have blood pressure issues with up and down blood pressure to where it's not consistent. Sorry, I had a call. There, declined. Y'all do know I do all of this on my phone, right? Some days. All right, back to it. So they're keeping a close watch on my heart. There is a chance that it's affecting cardiovascular function, so they want to keep a very, very close watch on that. I just had a pulmonary function test. Another thing they're keeping a close watch on is that diaphragm. As I mentioned, it can affect diaphragm, and I have noticed that I get winded a lot easier. I can't speak for as long before I have to catch my breath. Things like that. Some other issues do run in our family that are along that lines. I may end up with a CPAP machine just to help with breathing at night. I already have to sleep at kind of an elevated position. They say like 30 to 60 degrees, somewhere in there. That helps open up my airways and encourages breathing there, and I've found that is very helpful. Some other things that I've discovered, and I don't know how much this is gastroparesis or how much this is limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, or if it's like the two together or what, but I have found that high protein clear liquids now, broths, okay, specifically beef bone broth, is really good. My stomach tolerates it well. It's an animal protein. Now, one
nurse explained this to me, and it just made so much sense that I've tried it, and she is so right in so many ways. There's so many different ways to get protein. You can get protein from plants, and you can get protein from animals. Now, I buy my dogs Victor dog food, Victor brand dog food, V as in violin, ICKE, no, ICTOR. Victor, I could use some funding, just saying. One of the things I love about this dog food is they divide their different varieties up by where the proteins come from and how much fiber is in the, how much gluten is in that. So the one I get is the high pro, and then they've got a couple others, and I love it because you can see how much of the protein is coming from plants versus how much is coming from animals versus how much grains and stuff is in it as well. And I just really like that particular mixture. I'm not going to go into, this isn't about dog food, but it's interesting because humans digest different proteins differently too. It's easier to break down a protein that's already an animal product. We are animals. Going from animal to animal is a much simpler step than going from plant to animal. So yes, you can get protein from beans and lentils, and lots of kales have protein in them, and I think don't quote me on that. There's lots of different, mushrooms have protein, peanuts have protein. If you're allergic to peanuts, sorry, but I mean, nuts do have protein. So there are plant options to get protein, and I'm not saying if you're a vegetarian that you have to just stop that and you must eat meat. No, I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is if you've got gastroparesis, or if you've already got problems digesting proteins and food in general, or if you have a problem where your body is having difficulty creating proteins, using an easier protein that's easier for the body to break down and reform in the first place, saves your body some stress and might make your world a little bit easier. So, is this tough? There are vegetable broths. They don't have as much protein in them, but they are an option. And if the plants are broken down more already, then it's easier for the body to absorb them as well. Now, there's a lot of give and take. There's a lot of people who disagree. There's a lot of speculation. This is just what I've experienced. And what I have experienced is that if I am having problems getting food in, if I can drink some broth, I feel better. It's that simple. I feel better after drinking broth. I have more energy. My stomach tolerates it better. My gut starts to move a little bit smoother. When it's over with, my head is clearer and I can function better. It's just seems to help. So broth, the one that I found is the most effective. I recently discovered it. I've been using it now for about 2 months, and I really believe it's helping a lot. Is beef bone broth. Chicken broth is a go-to. I need a lot of sodium. My sodium for some reason tends to be low. Don't know if that's a gastroparesis, don't know if it's EDS, don't know what it is, but my sodium levels tend to stay low. Chicken broth seems to help that. I don't worry about the less sodium. I need the sodium. So if you have diabetes and you need low sodium, go for a lower sodium. If you don't have diabetes or high cholesterol and you don't have a problem with sodium, maybe you're low like me, don't be afraid to take sodium. Don't let other people judge you because you're buying something that has salt in it. You may need that salt. If you don't. All right, there's my little soapbox. Get off of that real quick. Okay, so other things that I have found that help specifically with stamina, strength for the day, and just not hurting and aching. Ibuprofen and aspirins do help reduce inflammation and sometimes do help with the pain in like my lower neck, right in here and in here. Otherwise, Tiger Balm does help. It's a homeopathic remedy. It doesn't have all the chemicals and stuff. and you just rub it on, and it helps take some of the pain away, and I found that to be beneficial as well. Fiber is a big deal. Now again, this could be gastroparesis, this could be EDS, this could be muscular dystrophy, could be all three working together. But what I can tell you is that when I incorporated a vitamin fiber supplement into my diet, my IBS, the gastroparesis, and a lot of the abdominal cramping and pain that I was experiencing were relieved. So fiber was a big deal. It doesn't always help, and sometimes it goes the other way, but it does help a significantly large portion of the time. So fiber control is very important into your diet. Liquid fibers are great. If you're having difficulty with solids, try switching over for a while to a pureed or liquid diet. They're easier to digest. Again, even vegetables, if they're broken down already, some are easier for the body to break down altogether and get the amino acids out of it that they need to rebuild the protein. And the more building blocks you can give your body in the first place, the more it has to work with, the better it can do, even if it's not perfect. So, okay, I think I have increased the length of time on this video significantly enough to justify letting y'all go. So far, I've managed to slow the progression into my arms and my hands on the right side pretty well. I'm very right hand dominant. I need to work more on my left side. It's not nearly as well developed. I have trouble lifting my legs, but I have learned to balance and to get by a little bit better so that I'm able to go a little bit further than I was. I can now walk about 20 feet altogether, perhaps 25 on a really good day. I do still have bad days. There are days I'm lucky to get from the couch to the bathroom, I'll be honest. And in the future, I'm told that I can not look forward to that getting any better. There may come a time where I can't lift that coffee pot. There may come a time where I can't get the milk out of the refrigerator. There may come a time I can't get to the refrigerator. There may come a time where I can't push my wheelchair. There may come a time I can't get out of bed. But I'm going to find ways to continue to contribute and to be a part of society and to be a meaningful member of my family.
And now back to our regularly scheduled programming.
I hope this video helped you learn a little bit, or helped you learn at least how to understand some of our insanity. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative, educational, entertaining. My head's shrinking because I don't think anybody's going to comment. Prove me wrong. Leave a comment. Share the video. Thanks so much for taking the time. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give me a thumbs down. But if you give me a thumbs down, please promise me you took the time to get all the way to this point. Take a moment to tell me why you're giving me a thumbs down. I don't get a lot of them. I'm a little sensitive. Just kidding, y'all. I'm not going to get my feelings hurt. Let me know what you think. Let me know how I can grow so I can learn.